Welcome to the Accessibility and AI series brought to you by Every Learner Everywhere and the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I'm the Associate Director for Innovation and Programs with Every Learner Everywhere. Every learner is committed to creating inclusive and accessible materials. Our slides are designed with high contrast visuals, large text, and descriptive alt text for images. You can scan the QR code to view the slides on your phone if you prefer. If you need slides in an alternative format or additional accommodations, please let us know. We value your feedback and make our content accessible for everyone. Before I introduce our speakers for today, I'd like to take out just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of education technologies, curriculum, and course design strategies, teaching practices, and support services that personalize instruction for students in blended and online learning environments. Every Learner Everywhere is sponsored by the Gates Foundation, and here at Every Learner, our collaborative work to advance access to higher education centers on the transformation of post-secondary teaching and learning. We build capacity in colleges and universities to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to partner with institutions to harness digital learning technology, driving innovation in higher education to improve outcomes for every learner. The Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group is a joint project of the Orbis Cascade Alliance and the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium to ensure that digital resources are equitably accessible to all users. And now to our speakers for today. Justy Eccles is the Course Development Manager and Accessibility Specialist with the Teaching and Learning Center for Oregon Health and Science University, and Tasha Biesinger, LMS Product Manager and Canvas Administrator for Oregon State University. Tasha's accessibility work is grounded in strong collaboration with accessibility experts from across campus, translating their shared expertise in practical guidance for employees at Oregon State University. Along with Tasha, along the way, Tasha has quickly developed a solid working knowledge of accessibility principles and best practices. So I'm going to turn it over to Justy.
Thank you. So I'd like to start with this reminder of the Department of Justice ruling as of April 2024 that state and local governments, including public universities, ensure that websites, apps, and digital content, including course content and materials, meet Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.1 Level AA accessibility standards. The deadline for that was, as of a couple of days ago, just a few days from now, April 24th, 2026. However, the current status is that as of Friday, I think it was just a couple of days ago, they've extended that deadline by a year. So the compliance date for state and local government entities with populations of over 50,000 is now April 26th, 2027. And for under 50,000, it's April 26, 2028. So that's good news. I don't know much more than that as it's so new. Other than that, we will just continue our efforts to be in compliance. So what are we doing at OHSU? I will start with some broad campus-wide efforts towards digital accessibility compliance, talk a little bit about our support for faculty, and then focus our actions and resources regarding PDFs before handing it over to Tasha and what they're doing at Oregon State University. So in response to the initial ruling in 2024, the Digital Access Committee, or DAC, was formed with representatives from various campus departments and missions. So at OHSU, we have three missions: clinical, research, and education. So DAC members met to discuss, and we still meet to discuss and create policies for accessibility compliance, ensure leadership accountability, and develop guidelines for training and education. So I'm sure a main topic of our next meeting is this extended deadline and the minor updates that we'll have to make to our policies and our roadmap. Meanwhile, a small team formed within the education mission initially to discuss PDFs and PDF remediation, but we expanded to become the digital accessibility for the education mission team. We're currently piloting a digital accessibility liaisons or DALS program with volunteers from varied departments and smaller teams. We meet regularly to provide training and support for auditing their team's accessibility needs and using available accessibility remediation tools. This includes training on built-in tools like Microsoft's Accessibility Checker in PowerPoint, Word, and even Excel, as well as making sure our DALs have access to Adobe Acrobat Pro and Equidocs for PDF check and remediation. So the title of our session today is Keep Calm and Make It Accessible. As a member of OHSU's Teaching and Learning Center, who's always had accessibility specialist in my job title since I started 8 years ago, I've been supporting faculty in creating digitally accessible online course content. I wasn't exactly getting very much buy-in though, right? Especially because course content was a password protected exception and therefore it wasn't required except for accommodations. I was also presenting a lot of web content accessibility guidelines or WCAG language at first and trying to explain alt text, which was all very overwhelming to our faculty. Remember too that just a few years ago, providing captions and transcripts was a third-party process, which was very time-consuming and expensive. So over the years, I've developed much more faculty-friendly approaches to accessibility, and the technology has really, really helped by becoming easier. So computer-generated transcripts, for example, right? And the recent updates to the built-in tool for checking accessibility and remediating accessibility in PowerPoint and Word. I was recently training on that, and one faculty member almost said that it was fun, right? So that was a really big step forward for us. I now ask faculty to be a chill cat. So they remember the accessibility basics of captions and transcripts, headings, images needing alt text, um, links, lists, color, and tables. So we also use friendly and memorable graphics like our Captain Captions superhero when we were making a big push for captions and transcripts, and our superhero accessibility ally. So currently, OHSU is switching our LMS from Sakai to Brightspace, mostly for accessibility reasons, right? So Sakai just wasn't compatible with accessibility tools. But this is an excellent opportunity to integrate accessibility training into our training on Brightspace so that it's a part of the process and not an external extra thing that needs to be done, although it sort of is. While this is a really distinct opportunity to integrate accessibility training, I strongly recommend integrating accessibility training wherever possible, right? So presentations, good slide design, universal design for learning, and quality matters, for example. So throughout our work, we noticed that faculty, digital accessibility liaisons, and any other content creators seem to always immediately go to remediation. And there were a lot of concerns about that because it's time consuming, it's difficult, and often costly, especially, of course, regarding PDFs. So we emphasize steps to take before getting to remediation with this: reduce, rebuild, remediate. Reduce means asking if you really need documents, especially PDFs, or if you can enter that content directly into your web or course page. You can also reduce by archiving outdated materials or using the ROT method of reducing redundant, obsolete, or transitory or trivial materials. After reducing, you can rebuild, right? It's much easier to create content accessibly than to remediate. So we provide resources on accessibility basics as well as a digital accessibility checklist. And then finally remediate, right? There are times when you do need the content to be a PDF, and our faculty do, or another document. And so this is definitely possible, though PDF remediation is still difficult and time consuming, even with the remediation tools like Adobe Acrobat Pro and Equidocs. So we always remind people of the tools to check and remediate, such as Wave for web pages, built-in and integrated tools for Word, PowerPoint, and the LMS, and again, Adobe Pro and Equidocs for PDFs. So we also use Census Access, which is good because it's sort of a direct program where people can upload documents and then get the transferred document directly to their own email, so you don't have to go through other people. But it seems that it's more for transferring already accessible documents to alternate formats. So you can upload an accessible PDF and get an audio file returned to you from that. Finally, we have specific information for and specific information sheets for the accessibility of PDFs. This takes two tracks, right? Created PDFs and third-party PDFs. For created, we offer steps to take if the answer to that question is, do I really need this to be a PDF? So if the answer is yes, make sure your source document is accessible. Do not print to PDF, and then remediate if necessary. So right now I'm working with a faculty group who are creating PDFs from PowerPoints, and they're doing very well with alt text considering it's an anatomy group and they have very complex images. So I was really happy to see that. But we need to discuss slide reading order, why that's so important, and how to fix those in their PowerPoints before creating the PDF. For third-party PDFs like journal articles, chapters, and the like, we emphasize reduce, rebuild, remediate. We also ask our faculty and others to see if there's an accessible version of that journal article, for example, online. I just worked with a faculty member who's putting up a course for Quality Matters Review, who had a lot of PDFs in his course, but he found a surprising number of accessible versions online, and you don't need an account or a login to access them. And so he just had to change the link, right? These often have an option to download a PDF version, but that's great for people who prefer PDFs, but we don't need to make sure that those PDFs are accessible because we're already linking to the accessible HTML version, right? So HTML is always the most accessible version or format. So the other main option is to check if the content is available in our OHSU library and use permalinks to those. The library works closely with publishers, so chances are the content is more accessible and current than a PDF that somebody uploaded several years ago to their webpage or to their course. So that's really it. I'm going to post two links to ARC, our Online Accessibility Resource Center. The first is just kind of a direct link more to our documents page in ARC, and then the second link is the more general ARC site page. And so if you have any questions before we moving on to Tasha.
Justy, there was a question, which I think is a great one from Norma. Why is it important to reduce the use of PDFs? Is there something fundamentally inaccessible about PDFs? Which I think is a great question. Do you want to answer
Why
that?
is it important to reduce the number of PDFs?
The use of PDFs? And is there something fundamentally inaccessible about PDFs?
So PDFs used to be this magical document, right? It was like if, a long time ago, if you sent a word from a Word file from a Mac to a PC, they couldn't open them. And so PDFs were this universal file type, and they were really meant for printing, right? And so they weren't really ever developed to be a digital materials. The problem with PDFs is often that it's a very complex tagging structure. And again, they're hard to remediate because first of all, you have to pay to even have the check accessibility tool. So a lot of people don't even have the paid version, Adobe Acrobat Pro, to even check the PDFs for accessibility. People like them because they are kind of universal, transferable. They're less easy to edit, so people like that. There's that's kind of like that it is what it is when they're delivering that PDF to people. And yeah, it's just a format that people like. It's kind of like easy to use. However, now that accessibility is a requirement, it's again several difficulties, right? So even if you have the paid version, Adobe Pro, you're really working with tag structure, you're working with reading order, heading styles, and it can be very, very complex. And so I've gotten better at it. I have to remediate a lot of PDFs that people are using for Quality Matters Review. But if there's ever a problem with the table and the table wasn't formatted correctly in the source document, I need to go to Equidocs because it's really extremely difficult to remediate and fix an inaccessible table in a PDF, right? And so in Equidocs, it's a lot easier to fix those tables. So I actually, and most of us use both Adobe Pro and Equidocs. But again, that might give you an indication of how difficult it really is to remediate a PDF. A couple other reasons, like this faculty group that I'm working with now, they like PDFs because the students actually annotate on the document in a way that it's much more difficult to do, I guess, on a Word file or a PowerPoint. And so, so a few different reasons why people like them. In addition to a lot of the third-party reading materials are PDF format, right? So publishers are creating the PDFs. As well. And so, so they are difficult. And so we're really trying to get a lot of accessibility is helping faculty and other people really consider the materials that they're uploading and that they're putting out there, right? And so the idea of reducing the number of PDFs is just that. Like chances are they're inaccessible, they are hard to remediate, even though it is possible. But just make people a little bit more considerate of the content that they're uploading. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Thank you, Justy, for answering that. And thank you, everybody. I am Tasha Biesinger from Oregon State University, and it is a pleasure and an honor for me to represent the work of OSU colleagues from across the university who have really guided the collaborative effort that is required for our institutional accessibility work to succeed, especially around shifting the culture around accessibility. These colleagues these include colleagues from the following teams and units: the UIT Academic Technologies Group, primarily responsible for the learning management system, which for us is Canvas; the OSU Libraries Department, which specializes and has expertise on publisher articles and historical documents; our OSU Extension Group, which creates engagement programs and content for our larger community in the state and beyond; our UIT Digital Experience folks, which support the institutional website contents, which is specifically in Drupal; OSU eCampus, which is our dedicated online education unit; and I can't believe that I forgot to add them to this slide, our colleagues from the Equal Opportunity and Access team, which their whole office is responsible for overseeing compliance. So they obviously have been involved, and I'm very embarrassed that I did not include them on this slide. So some of the key outcomes from this collaborative effort were creating specific digital accessibility documentation for institutionally supported systems and software, i.e. helping faculty know and employees know how to use the software and the systems better to make accessible content. We also organized and delivered college and departmental accessibility trainings and workshops so that we could focus on specific questions coming out from those units. We organized and host weekly accessibility office hours, which is especially popular. People can come, bring their specific questions, and get help right in the moment. And then we also created and facilitate an institutional digital accessibility community in our Microsoft Teams environment where people can post questions and get responses that's more asynchronous. But it has flourished, and we have lots of contributors from across the institution. We hope to see that continue to grow as people learn and flex their accessibility muscles. And then for PDF specifically, we've created a PDF decision tree and a complex documents workflow to help folks consider options and paths forward for creating accessible content. So as messaging around digital accessibility requirements started to be shared by institutional leadership with their units, one of the most regular concerns around how are we supposed to do this came in the form of handwritten content, and specifically handwritten math content that was then scanned and converted into a PDF document. So even before sharing details of our PDF decision tree and complex documents workflow, I'd like to share some functional results of fixing, and that fixing is in quotes, a PDF containing handwritten math content. So our example started as a PDF containing 6 pages of handwritten math lecture notes. And on the screen is a small segment of the first page of that document and shows a handful of formula manipulation steps for polar coordinate math. So if you're a mathematician, that means something to you. And I believe remediating the PDF in Adobe Acrobat is currently not feasible, though I hope that we'll come back to this at the end of the webinar, because I do believe that there is significant progress being made in that area. But this is our starting document, and we did some work and some testing, and we found that converting this content to a Canvas page took about 2 hours. And this 2 hours of work included creating all of the equations with LaTeX through the built-in Canvas equation editor and adding alt text to the diagrams present in the original document. And I will point out that that 2 hours was partly because the person doing the conversion was not fluent in LaTeX and had to do a lot of Google searching to figure out how to write the LaTeX. Whereas someone whose area is math is probably already familiar with the math, and so the amount of time should be significantly reduced by someone who was an expert in LaTeX. Converting the same content to a Word document took about 30 minutes by using MathPix software. And again, this was not done by a mathematician. This was done by someone who is comfortable with accessibility in MathPix. And so they were able to just do a quick review. But essentially, someone who is not the subject matter expert was able to convert this into a Word document in 30 minutes with some extra help from the software. So for both Canvas and Word, the result is that we have a format that is now a living document, which means that it can be easily edited and updated as the content changes. Additionally, the content is clearer and less ambiguous for all users. There were several instances in this PDF where the instructor's handwriting was not clear in the original document. Is that a U or is it a V in the vector diagrams? And in summary, the time spent replacing this PDF with other accessible formats was well worth it. And there are tools that can help speed up the process. And importantly, it does not prevent the instructor from still working through the problems in class by hand as they want. It does result in a very nice, clean, accessible format to share with the students after the lecture that everyone can take advantage of. So based on this summary, this leads us really nicely into the OSU PDF decision tree that we created to help guide faculty with what to do about their existing content, and hopefully by extension, should help them consider better options for any new content they create. So the OSU PDF decision tree contains 7 questions designed to be asked consecutively if the answer to the previous question is no. And those questions are, first, is the PDF part of your required course materials? If yes, then, well, I guess that one's a yes answer. If yes, the second question is, do you have the original source file, for example, a Microsoft Word document? If so, replace it with the Word document. If you don't have the original source file, the third question is, could the document be a Canvas page? Can you recreate it as a Canvas page? If yes, please recreate it as a Canvas page. If no, the fourth question then is the content available from the OSU library? So the idea being, okay, maybe it's an article that you got and you have the PDF. Maybe you can link to it, as Justy mentioned, provide a permalink to that article in the library. If the content is not available from the OSU libraries, the fifth question then asks, is the document a form? Are you asking students to fill it out and, you've got it in PDF format and maybe a fillable PDF, maybe not even fillable PDF. If it is a form, please use some software. For instance, at OSU, we have Qualtrics, we have Microsoft Forms, we technically have Google Forms, and we ask people to recreate that form through some software specifically designated or dedicated to creating forms. If it's not a form, the sixth question is then, is the document a scanned copy of an article or book chapter? And again, that answer is again kind of back to the OSU libraries in case they didn't think about that in question 4. So if it is anything from a publisher that is not your content, we should be engaging with the publishers, and that's generally done through the OSU libraries. And then last but not least, so they've gone through this whole thing. Our seventh question is, where can I get help if none of these options work for me? So at that point, if they've gone through this whole list and they're like, none of these are viable options, where can I get help? And we do direct them to connect either through our open office hours that we have for accessibility or through the Microsoft, our community and Microsoft Teams, or if needed, they can connect with specific units on campus. So, in close alignment with Justy's awesome, I love the OHSU phrasing of reduce, replace, and remediate. Each of our questions actually aligns with either reduce, which is question 1, replace, which is questions 2 through 6, or in our case, we don't explicitly say the word remediate anywhere. We say reach out. Because as Justy mentioned, remediating PDFs is a significant amount of work and sometimes not actually feasible currently. And so that's where employees can connect with Canvas accessibility experts for guidance and support for their specific issue. We also recognize that many folks, especially instructors, have content that is not just simple text, and if they look at their document as a whole and in the specific format of the original document, their reaction, the common reaction was feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to start. So one of the other documents that we created was focusing on making complex documents accessible, with the core message being break it down and don't expect the accessible version to be an exact duplicate of the original. And so our specific steps in this document was first to do an assessment to identify and break down the whole document into the different elements, such as equations and graphs. Secondly, to focus on the text of the document first. So text is easy, make text. And then convert any of the images of text into real text. So get rid of things that are pictures of text and turn it into real text. The third item is to ensure that the math equations are formatted in an accessible way. So this is one of those places where PDFs can't do that. They just don't have the tools yet. So when you're using Word, use the built-in equation editor. When you're using Canvas, use the built-in equation editor. A lot of folks write their equations in LaTeX. We will come back to LaTeX at the end because that's a really important topic. But whatever software you're using, make sure that you are using the tools to make math equations accessible. The fourth item, always provide alt text or either long descriptions or the original source data. So if you've got an image, provide alt text. If it's a complex image, you might need long descriptions, or if it's a graph, provide the source data in the form of an accessible table. And then the fifth item, split multi-part images into smaller pieces and address each image by adding alternative text or making it decorative. Or in the example that I'll share in just a minute, providing long descriptions with each of the smaller components. So this does bring us to an example. And in this case, the example that was provided by a faculty is they teach anatomy and physiology. I forgot for a second, A and P. So in this slide, there is an image of a completed diagram of a kidney nephron where during the lecture, the instructor starts with an empty sketch of the various channels and structures of the nephron, but nothing is labeled. It's just black squiggly lines. And then during the lecture, she draws, for instance, the flow of the blood from the artery through the nephron and various molecules like water and the salt ions moving in and out of the urine production stream. And she does all of this as she's verbally describing the process to the class. And historically, she's then just provided the completed diagram, which is shown on the screen and is very complex, as a scanned image in PDF format. So thinking through her normal workflow, she was able to provide the lecture recording because she was so descriptive in her verbal description during class that the lecture recording had a built-in audio description of everything that she was doing. So Norma, do you mind advancing a couple clicks? So for this particular instructor, she could just provide the lecture recording instead of the inaccessible PDF. I'm a PowerPoint person, so another alternative option would be to use PowerPoint, but not in a way to give a presentation. So I've got the word presentation in kind of quotes here, where each slide of the PowerPoint file contains a new layer of the diagram. And on each of those slides, the slide notes provide the long description of the layer on that slide. So in the image that just got put up, one of the slides shows the blood flow, which starts from the renal artery, transits through the nephron, and then out through the renal vein. So the slide has this image, but then in the notes, it has the details of what the blood is doing, where it's going, the components of the nephron that the blood is flowing through. And then the next slide, which is a teeny tiny box over on the left of that image, showed the next layer of, for instance, the urine flow. And then the third option in this particular case, especially if you have a textbook for the course, probably that textbook has all of that detailed information in the textbook. And so the third option is rather than providing the hand-drawn picture
Can you
reference.
go back one slide? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So in the image, over on in the image of PowerPoint on the left panel, PowerPoint has the different slides that you can jump to. And so in this image, there's about 4 slides that are visible. The first slide is empty. The second slide has the blood flow. The third slide has the urine flow. The fifth slide has the water flow. And then subsequent slides add in like the salt elements, sodium, potassium flowing in and out. So the PowerPoint is not used to give the lecture. The PowerPoint is after the fact lecture that shows each of the components. And then the very last slide in this particular deck is a combination of all of those various layers. So the really complex PDF that the instructor originally had been sharing. So a lecture recording, a PowerPoint quote unquote presentation, or just telling students, hey, this is what we talked about in class. Please go and read or review textbook pages, 230 through 240 for details. So there were several options of replacing the inaccessible PDF, which I don't see any viable way of making that particular PDF accessible. But there are several options for alternatives, they all have their pros and cons, and people are going to have preferences. I hate seeing myself and hearing myself in recordings, so I would not choose lecture recording, but I love PowerPoint. So faculty can choose the options that fits them best, and hopefully also what fits the students best. So this was just one example of a complex document. The thing where I would say we still struggle, and I don't think there are any perfect solutions yet, but there has been some wonderful movement, is for LaTeX. So a lot of our math and computational faculty, so math, physics, engineering, a lot of these faculty write their entire document in LaTeX, which is a text format, text file format. And over the years, there has been some movement on how can we make make the LaTeX file that convert this text file into an accessible output file. And so on this particular slide, I've got three options that came from various years. The first flow is taking the text document. All three of them start with the text document or the LaTeX. And the first bullet point here goes through using a tool or a plugin to LaTeX called TechSoup and ImageMagick as the first step. And then in the second step, you used another batch of tools called Softcover or Polytechnics, and then Trellix, and that will spit out an HTML that's accessible. But gosh, you really have to know the ins and outs of these various steps. The second line is using text, starting with text and using some packages in, for instance, Overleaf called Tag PDF or Lua LaTeX to convert to a PDF, more or less accessible PDF, questionable, or using a combination of text for HT, Pandoc, or LaTeX XML to convert it into HTML. And then the third item is the shortest of all so far, and that's taking the LaTeX document using LaTeX XML and converting it to HTML directly. And for all of these examples, it's not perfect. There are gaps. And so is that really helpful? I don't know. I am not an expert in LaTeX, so I've just been following these conversations. For all three of these workflows, we've got some reference links if you want to go and take a look at it. For folks that are familiar with LaTeX, they'll make a whole lot more sense to you. For us specifically, we really want our faculty to be able to put that thing into Canvas because that's where the students live for us. So that generally means we need an HTML output. And in general, HTML is just better because it's easier to manipulate and update as needed. I have been following conversations on this, and I am excited to see the movement in this community. There are a lot of smart people looking at this, and this is where we're going to come back to PDF. I feel like Adobe, the company, doesn't really want to be the bad word in the accessibility community. All of us are like, get rid of your PDFs, quit using PDFs. I'm pretty sure Adobe is probably motivated to improve the accessibility of PDFs and managing PDFs. And we've already seen some new things coming out of Adobe. So from a technical perspective, I do feel and believe that between our communities that live in these spaces, for instance, with LaTeX and the PDF companies that don't want to be the bad word, we will see some improvement in these areas. So that's that for me. And I appreciate all of you being here and again, my opportunity to represent all of the work from colleagues across OSU. This is definitely not my work. So thank you very much. And we would love to hear from you if you've got thoughts, ideas, what are your challenges? And so I'll open it up for questions.
There was a question earlier that I think you all would love to tackle, and it had to do with if you've got a document that's not a PDF, but it's a view only, how accessible is that, or does it make it inaccessible when you do the view only? So could you kind of tackle that question?
I don't think view only changes the accessibility of a document. I think some people like PDFs because it is harder to edit and change, and so they want to make sure that somebody's not changing the document that they're providing. Um, and so making something read only is one way of kind of securing like a Word file or we're not a Google Docs school, and I know there were some questions about Google Docs, and I don't know. Um, I don't know much about Google Docs, so I won't answer to that. But it's just a way of people securing the document, and I really don't think it changes the accessibility functions of that document at all.
Yeah, and I will add, this has come up a handful of times, and one of the questions I ask is, what really is the purpose of making it view only? Because at the end of the day, if the main concern that I've heard is faculty who are like, well, I don't want students changing my document. And I'm like, well, what really is the concern? Because they can't change your document, for instance, in Canvas where it's shared with everybody else. So it's not like they can change your content that will then mislead all of the other students. So they download it, they change it, and they come back to you and say, well, your syllabus said something else, but you have your original. So I actually really struggle with what is the purpose for this. And there are definitely use cases for why and when you need it to be view only. But in those, it generally comes down to we really just do not want people to change how it appears on the screen. And that is one of the primary reasons people want to use PDFs because it doesn't matter how you open it, those words, that sentence is going to be that exact sentence. And you may have to scroll left and right, up and down, which is problematic, but they're like, I just want it locked in. And I get that, but at the same time, I hate having to scroll left and right, up and down to read a PDF. I want it to reflow so that it fits my screen, however big or small. So going to the core of it, I agree with Justy that making it view only doesn't damage the accessibility in general. If you add a password and say you can't even open the document without the password, of course, there's going to be issues for everybody. But I would definitely get to the root of what is your need? And is that really a need or just a personal preference? So, a wonderful, wonderful question. And I didn't really answer directly, but Justy did. So,
Justy, could you expand upon the conversation you were having in the chat with Kathy about the printing of the PDFs and kind of that direction when you're needing to scan something and printing it that way, or but making it accessible for the students?
Sure. So Kathy's first question was, I think finding material that's not available, but everybody can't, purchase the textbook that she's taking it from. So Kathy is making a scan, like of a textbook chapter, I imagine, to PDF. So my first question is, if you're printing it and handing it out, that's great. But if it's a digital material, a scan is the first thing that you need to ask yourself questions about. And because a scan it will come through as an image, right? So all of that text is not really readable. It's just one image, right? And you can easily test if a PDF is scanned by doing a word search of a word that you know is in the document and it's not coming up with anything. It's not finding it. And that's because it's not searchable text. So the first thing you need to do if you really do need a scan of material, work with your library. They're the best people to work with, and they can make sure that you're creating the scan using what's called OCR, which is optimal character recognition, I think. And it's making sure that that scan comes through as readable text in the resulting PDF. So that's the first step. The second step is, again, will that even an OCR, a scanned PDF, come through as an accessible PDF? Probably not. And so you would need kind of one of these paid tools, right? Adobe Pro or Equidocs, even to check to make sure that it's accessible. So again, I would say just working with your library is your best bet, right? First of all, maybe that content is available through the library, right? But again, if you have to use a scan, I would work with your library to try to make sure that that scan is accessible.
There was also a question, and we might have to have Matt expand upon this question in the chat for us, but what is your overall thoughts about using whiteboards as it relates to accessibility? And I'm not sure if that means the old-fashioned whiteboards on the wall or if it means like whiteboards within Zoom or any other software.
yeah, I don't mind stepping in here. So, when I think about the whiteboards, I think about it in terms of a live lecture rather than digital materials that you share after the fact. And so in that case, you would want to focus on what are you verbally saying and describing. So going back to our, integrative biology faculty who, as she drew out the diagram of the nephron, she described what she was doing and not just, I'm drawing an arrow, but literally the blood flows from the renal artery into the glomerulus of the nephron. And I never get glomerulus right. And so as you're using these whiteboards, yes, you can use them, but be descriptive in what you're saying. So, for instance, with math, don't just say, now you can multiply both sides by 3. I mean, you can if that's the actual step that you're doing, but you've described what the equation is and been very careful to say, absolute value of quantity x plus 2 divided by 4. Well, I didn't do that well because is it x plus 2 divided by 4 or 2 divided by? But you need to be clear in your verbal descriptions. But at the same time, for students who need disability in the class, disability accommodations in the classroom, your disability offices are not going anywhere. They are still needed, and their accommodations, the accommodations for students are still going to be required. So, as faculty, as educators, we need to do a better job of describing what we're doing. It will help all of our students. But students that need accommodations, the disability offices will still be there to provide those accommodations. So for live lectures, when I think about those whiteboards, those are the things that come to mind for me.
What about
Yeah, and just be
using, I think you said lucid, when you're in that kind of a situation?
Uh, yeah, so I've read the documentation of Lucid. So, Lucid, the tool, supposedly is accessible. So, the buttons and the clicks that Lucid is in control of supposedly is accessible, but the content that you create, just like with Word and Canvas, you are still responsible for making sure that that stuff is accessible. And I haven't looked specifically into Lucid, like how easy is it to add alt text to this arrow or that diagram. But at the end of the day, whatever tool you're using, you'll want to make sure that you look into what are the accessibility pieces, what are the things that are going to be challenges. And, we're all I don't have accessibility like degrees. I go to webinars like this and I've learned so much from colleagues. I would do what I can to find out lucid stuff, but at the end of the day, I would go to colleagues like Justy and the real accessibility experts and ask for help from them. Like, what really do I need to look into this to make sure that what I'm making is accessible? So, wonderful, wonderful questions. I think there are ways to do it. We just need to learn the tools that we're using. And Justy, did you have
I
comments?
I don't know about Lucid at all. That seems like a live, like kind of live captioning thing or something. But I will say, I just want to reiterate what Tasha said is when if you're lecturing and or if you're recording yourself, your verbal description is the alternative accessible format or can be if you make sure that you're really describing the information in an image, or if you're kind of drawing as you go along and narrating that, be very detailed and specific about the information as you go along. And that is now your alternative format. And so you can still provide like a PDF of the PowerPoint and, I mean, I wouldn't really upload that because it'll be flagged usually with accessibility tools as inaccessible, but you can provide a recording of yourself narrating the slides, and that is your accessible version. And so audio is a great alternative accessible version, um, uh, um, that you can use instead of like a PDF or something like that. There's a question here, if I convert PDF to Google Doc, is this method still inaccessible to students? I don't know how you can check. Can you check a Google Doc for accessibility? Again, I don't work with, we're not a Google school, Google Doc school. So I don't know. I mean, can you, does anybody know? So like if you convert to like from PDF to Word, then you can use Word's accessibility tool. and check that document for accessibility, right? And so if it was missing alt text in the PDF, you'll know that in Word, and you can add the alt text in the Word document. So again, I don't know about Google Docs. I will say that no matter which tool you're using, especially for Word, PowerPoint, maybe Google Docs, is a manual check is very important, right? So don't rely 100% on the technology, because it might miss some things, right? And so it's just always good to sort of know what the accessibility tool is checking, like you know enough about accessibility, to also use kind of a manual check, for your document.
So according to some of our Google Doc users, it does have an accessibility checker, and others are saying that there is an extension called Grackle that you can add. I was thinking of a bird when they said Grackle, but okay, it's an accessibility extension that you can add to your Google. So, we do have another question about there's some virtual classes for employees. So I'm assuming this is professional development that a school offers to their faculty and staff, and they have them in PowerPoints, and then they make them into fillable PDFs. And they do it because there's reflection questions and activities in the interactive PDF that allows the learners to take their work with them digitally. And wanting to know if anyone has any recommendations for another software that can create more accessible, interactive participant guides.
PDF forms are difficult, right? You have to tag each kind of like entry, and you have to really be really descriptive about each and every element. I don't work with forms that often. I know staff do. I work mostly with faculty, and so I don't run across it that much. We sometimes recommend can you use like Microsoft Forms or Qualtrics, kind of uh, programs that are specifically for kind of surveys and that kind of thing. I don't know more than that. Sorry.
Yeah, this particular question, I feel like I would need to see it and know the limitations of the software where you're delivering it. So, because my first thought is separate them. Have your content be your content in PowerPoint, and then have your interactive elements as a separate piece. And where you share them, they're side by side, or, linear, however you want students to, or your employees, students, employee students to engage with the content. But I don't know the limitations of your software to know what your options are, which, software matters. We've got some software that only accepts PDF. It's a problem. So that's where we do need to engage with vendors, and our contracts with vendors should have something about accessibility. And we all, as a community of institutions, need to push back on vendors and let them know that accessibility matters. And we need them to create accessible software. At the end of the day, we can only do so much with the tools that we have.
I am all for pushing back on the vendors. I understand that because early on when like courseware was coming out and there were some accessibility issues with some of the courseware and digital textbooks and stuff, it did take, the faculty and the accessibility teams on campuses to push back on the vendors saying, hey, you're making us do this extra work because you're not making your digital textbook accessible, your courseware is not accessible. So I am all for advocating to push back on the vendors, get their R&D teams to getting to work on it. So
I want to go back to this question from Kathy. If I were to print a book or a chapter or a couple of pages, uh, I think you're saying not print, but you're creating a PDF, right? And you're still entering it as a PDF link, so it's in Canvas, but then print it. So can a student print it and then that's accessible to them? So first of all, you can't really require students to print something to make it accessible to them because not all students have access to a printer, right? And so accessibility is really about equal access, right? An equivalent experience. So you can't require students to print something in order to make that accessible to them because they might not even be able to print it. Um, I mean, if you're printing handouts, a PDF is perfectly fine, right? Like if you're that's perfectly fine, right? A handout. We're talking about offering digital content, right? So even if you hand it out, but you're uploading that PDF to your course, that PDF is still a digital file that needs to be accessible, right? Because you're providing that. Um, and uh, and so yes, it still needs to be accessible. There's things like, even if you different tools allow students to say, hey, turn this PDF into an audio file, right? Now, that's fine, but your PDF has to be accessible in order for that audio file to be read in the correct reading order, for example, right? And so, again, it has to have the proper tags, all this kind of stuff. So, your the documents that you're providing need to be accessible. Um, yeah.
So there were questions about interactive. Is there any other way that you all can think of? I know that on some of our professional development, we do use Google Docs or Google Sheets because they are more shareable between learners. If we are working with a bunch of faculty or something like that, theoretically, then they can download it or make a copy or whatever if they need to take it with them outside of the professional development. Are there any other interactive? I mean, Padlet has some accessibility challenges to it and things like that if you're trying to do that interactive group collaboration, because you can change those to PDFs, but then you've got that PDF challenge. Are there any other things you all can think of that can help with that interactivity? We always talk about active learning, so
I will just add, we just adopted Poll Everywhere for interactive in the classroom engagement. So the instructor can post a question, students can answer, and in general, it is an accessible platform. Again, it comes back to what is your content that you're putting in. So if you put an image in and say, dear students, choose, A, B, or C, or D is the right answer, but I'm not going to tell you anything about what that image is. And then if the image doesn't show up on the student's device or they can't see the screen, so even though they can engage with Poll Everywhere, the tool, they cannot engage with your image because there's no alt text. They have no idea what's on the screen. So again, the software needs to be accessible. So we need to engage with vendors, but the content that we create needs to be done in an accessible way. And that's not the vendor, that's us. I mean, the vendor needs to make sure that we have the tools. So, social media, you can't even put a link in normal words. You have to just put the link in there. There's no way. So we do need to engage with vendors. We need their systems to be accessible and have accessibility tools so that we can create content. And I hope we're making progress in that area. It will take all of us because vendors are slow to move until money's on the line.
well, I want to thank you all for your time and answering those questions. I do want to let our audience know that we are very aware, NW Heaton and every learner is very aware that this is a topic that is going to continue to propagate more questions than answers sometimes. We do have 3 more webinars on accessibility scheduled for the fall. We don't have specific dates yet, but I just want to give everybody's attention to, we will be tackling some of those hot topics as, now that we have the extension from April 24th of this year to next year and the following year, we're excited that we can offer some more opportunities to look at solutions. So I do want to point that out, that keep your eyes open on our websites to see when those dates are confirmed and everything. So for our audience, we do ask that you take a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's webinar using the link that has been posted in the chat for you. And if you don't have time right now, if you've got something else going on, don't worry. We'll send you the link in the follow-up email that you'll receive. And once again, I would like to thank Tasha and Justy for their time. I want to thank our audience for coming and giving us some really cognitive persuasion here to go forward and figure out what some of the other solutions are out there and what the other questions are. But on behalf of Every Learner Everywhere and NW Heat and our partners, thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you do every day to support your students. Have a nice day.